Welcome to meeting number 88 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I will start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Of course, colleagues, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. First, I would like to say hello to our colleagues, Mr. Zuberi for Mr. Carr and Mr. Boulris, sharing time with Mr. McGregor. So welcome to our committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 19th, 2023, the committee resume its study of efforts to stabilize food prices. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. With us today, we have Mr. Eric Laflèche, President and Chief Executive Officer of Metro Incorporated. Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Laflèche, and thank you for your presence and for being here in person. So you have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to say that at Metro, we are aware and concerned about the impact of rising food prices on our customers. That goes without saying. That's why we take steps every day to deliver the best possible value to our customers to meet their diverse and constantly evolving needs. Our customers expect no less from us.
Across all our banners, our teams work tirelessly to deliver the best possible value to our customers with competitive pricing, our full range of private label products, efficient weekly promotions, and our loyalty programs. Every week, we offer promotions on more than 10,000 products across our food banners, generating significant savings for our customers on 1/3 of our inventory. This is not a new practice, but rather how we continue to earn and gain long-term customer loyalty. À titre d'entreprise publique,
as a public company, Metro competes daily for customers, talent, and capital in an open and extremely competitive market. By putting the customer at the heart of all our decisions in each of our stores and banners and across our network of 975 food stores, our business strategies have generated market share gains over the years, and more specifically, over the last few months. This is a clear sign of the confidence Canadians have in us.
I hope everyone in this room knows, and experts overwhelmingly agree, that global market forces far outside the control of grocers are driving food price inflation. According to Statistics Canada, food prices have stabilized over the past few months, while food price inflation has steadily declined over the past 6 months. Moreover, food inflation in Canada continues to be the second lowest amongst G7 countries and has been since September 2022. Metro's fourth quarter fiscal 23 results show our internal food basket inflation decelerated to 5.5%, approximately 2% lower than the food inflation reported by Statistics Canada. This is a key metric of customers' actual behavior, which we have been monitoring for years. In short, our efforts are having an impact and food prices have stabilized, but price stabilization is not simply achieved overnight, nor is it the exclusive responsibility of grocers. Metro stands at the end of a very long supply chain, which continues to experience instability, and we are already facing pressure for cost increases in the new year. So all players must remain actively engaged. En réalité, nous travaillons dans l'une des
In fact, we work in one of the industries with the lowest profit margins in Canada at less than 5%. We have to deal with tens of thousands of price increases that we receive every year from our suppliers, but we do so as gradually as possible, absorbing some of the costs and working tirelessly every day to deliver the best possible value.
Competitive industry, Metro fights hard every day to earn our customers' business, trust, and loyalty. That's why when I met with Minister Champagne 3 months ago, I committed that our team would continue to work to deliver the best value possible to help our customers, because that's what our customers demand of us. Secondly, to continue to enhance consumer trust and ensure a more resilient supply chain, I committed that Metro would adopt the industry-led grocery code of conduct once finalized. Notre équipe a joué un rôle de premier plan dans les
Our team played a leading role in the development of the code, and we are convinced that the participation of all grocers and suppliers is essential to its success. These are the commitments we have made, yes, with the minister and the government, but more importantly, with the Canadians who choose to shop with us, and we will continue to deliver on these commitments every day.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Laflèche.
Thank you, Mr. Laflèche. Now, we will move on to the question period. We will start with Ms. Rood for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Laflèche, for being with us today. Now, I know you just mentioned in your opening statement that you are in favor of the Grocery Code of Conduct, and thank you for being a part of that, because I know that it's going to have a very good effect between the relationships for our suppliers and the grocers. Mr. Laflèche, you mentioned that the Prime Minister summoned you to Ottawa, and I'm just wondering, you've said publicly that you've given the government a list of recommendations, and what specific recommendations did you ask the government to initiate, and how many of these recommendations have been acted upon?
Like I said in my opening statement, the commitments I made to the minister at that meeting were to continue to deliver value as best we can to our customers every day. We did this before, and we continue to do it today, I think with some success. The second commitment we made was to sign this code of conduct, which is close to being finalized. So those were my commitments. I think our company has delivered on them, and judging by our performance and our sales and our growing market share, I think it resonates with our customers.
Now, we heard in the last committee meeting that there are some retailers that have some issues with the code of conduct. Is there anything that's stopping you from signing the code of conduct right now?
Well, we said publicly that we're willing to sign the version that's on the table today. We participated. One of my colleagues is on the working group, along with several other people, retailers, suppliers, association representatives. So the code as it stands is something that we can sign. It reflects how we conduct our business with our suppliers, and something we can live with and are willing to sign. So I've said that for a little while. Hopefully we'll get there.
If you go into Metro, the prices have never been higher.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When your store was before this committee last spring, I had brought to the attention of your company some of the unfair practices and penalties that your company was charging farmers and suppliers. And I'm just wondering has your company made any changes to the way that it deals with farmers and small suppliers to this point?
We have good relations with our suppliers and farmers in general. The terms of our agreements are clear. If there are any penalties, and that's in a very small minority of cases, they are as per the terms of the agreement. So we have not changed the way we conduct our business, and I think we have good relations with those vendors.
Earlier this year, the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change has proposed a P2 plastics ban. And to those watching at home, it's a new plastics ban. It's not something that's with the old ban, and that will prevent produce from having plastic packaging. And I'm just wondering, we've heard in the last meeting that it could cost upwards of $6 billion down the supply chain, which will ultimately fall on consumers, and the price of food will go up if this plastics ban were to go ahead. Did your company participate in the consultations for the proposed plastics ban for fresh food? And do you believe consumers will see an increase to the price of food if this plastics ban is imposed? And as far as the timeline, do you think the timeline is achievable?
Well, in answer to your first question, we did participate through the Retail Council, of which we are members, active members. So representations have been made. Some concerns have been shared. Any regulation or tax that will increase costs along the supply chain are a concern, especially in these inflationary times. So we have voiced those concerns, but it will be a government decision at the end of the day.
So the plastic
So are
ban
you
is
in
gonna end
favor
up
of the plastics
costing us
ban,
a
or are you
lot more
opposed
money
to
per
this
food.
proposed
Well, we're all
plastic
for the
ban?
reduction of plastics, and we have a lot of initiatives at Metro to reduce plastic and reduce food waste in our stores and throughout our supply chain. I think we're doing a good job. We've made a lot of progress. There's a lot of work to do. This particular initiative, I don't know all the specific details and specific timelines particularly, but as we're all concerned about rising food prices and price stabilization, I think it would be wise to consider the timing or the timelines. So I will let the policymakers come up with those answers.
Thank you. The government promised Canadians that they would lower prices for consumers at the grocery store by Thanksgiving, and they broke that promise. And we've heard in the media that stores like yourself are going to put a pause on increasing prices of goods at the store right now. And that's standard practice, as I understand, through the holiday season. But I think you've
Prices
said
are
publicly that
already
you're going to
too
keep that
high.
on and into the
They
new
need to
year.
reduce prices,
Once
not keep them the same.
that price freeze has expired, what can consumers, what will they see at the grocery store? Can they count on there being higher prices once the reductions or the freezes are on? Because you mentioned in your opening remarks that people have been asking for increases because the cost of goods is going up from the supply side of things to supply it to the grocery stores. So can we expect price increases in the new year once the freeze is finished?
So we are in the middle of the cost freeze, the blackout period, quote unquote, as we call it in our industry, which will end in the beginning of February. So we are receiving demands for cost increases from some consumer packaged goods companies. So our team in the new year will deal with those. We'll negotiate as best we can to mitigate and negotiate the best we can the cost increases that they're asking from us. But there will likely be increases accepted if justified, and those increases will likely be reflected at retail over time. It doesn't happen all overnight, but there are cost increases in the system that will likely be accepted. Exactly the timing and how much remains to be seen, but we can expect, and it is a concern that there will be some inflationary pressure, normal inflationary pressure, and in some cases more than normal inflationary pressure in certain products over the new year. So we'll do our best to mitigate that for our customers.
Okay, thank you very much. Maintenant, Madame Taylor-Roy pour 6 minutes.
Now on to Ms. Taylor-Roy for 6 minutes, please.
Merci,
Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Because it did nothing anyway.
Bonjour.
Hello, and thank you for being here in person.
Very well, so I'll switch to English. So I just wanted to thank you for being here and to say that, we have some concerns about Metro's enthusiasm for the efforts our government is making to try and stabilize food prices. And I just want to correct something for the record, that our government never said we were going to lower grocery prices by Thanksgiving, but rather we were working to stabilize them. However, you expressed then some concerns about whether this would work or not, and you repeated that today. And I must say that I was disappointed when I saw Metro's submission to the committee of your plans to try and take action on this without going into details, because we all know it's confidential. It was not very robust, let's put it that way again. And I feel that you question the government's role in meeting with the heads of grocery chains to try and address this problem, which is of great concern, and we realize, as many do, that they are global factors, supply chain factors that have caused this problem. But when Canadians are suffering so acutely, and grocery retail profits, not margins, but profits, absolute profits are increasing, we feel that trying to work with the grocery sector, with the chains, to come up with some solutions is the best way forward, as opposed to imposing things. So I'm wondering why you feel that there's nothing that can be done when other CEOs have said these efforts have resulted in some positive actions, and that they are seeing and they are doing things they weren't doing before. Why is it that you feel that this is something that's not perhaps worth the time of Metro?
Well, that's not exactly what I said. What I said is we take the process seriously. And like we did before and like we continue to do today, we're committed to deliver value to our customers. That's our job. That's what we're paid to do. If we don't do that, we lose customers. And if we lose business, that's not good for us. So we made 2 commitments, delivering value, signing the code, and we've lived by them. So our merchandising efforts are in place in all of our stores every week, every month. We have programs that have to resonate with customers. So we have taken a lot of measures.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I read the submission. I understand that your commitment is to delivering the best value for customers, and that's what all the chains say. Of course, you're competing, and that's normal business as usual, obviously, for a for-profit corporation like yourself. We understand that. But these are extraordinary times. And food inflation, because of many factors, post-COVID economy, the war, supply chain disruptions of other sorts.
He doesn't care at all.
People are really
Why would he?
suffering. And grocery prices
Not his
have
job to
gone
care.
up by
It's your
extraordinary
job to
amounts.
care.
So we asked for something out of the normal from the grocery companies. All of you have to compete. So what you gave us was the norm. And what we were asking for was something out of the norm, something that could help your customers and show Canadians that the grocery chains do care about the struggles that people are having today.
Well, we do care. I do care. It's a reality that affects all Canadians, everyone. So we care. And we have to care because otherwise we lose customers. So we have to come up with programs that resonate and that provide value to our customers. And that's what our merchandisers do every week. So to say extra special, in special times, you have to have extra special effective merchandising. And if you're going to resonate with your customers, and I think that's what our teams have successfully done. So you've heard of certain price reductions? Well, we have certain price reductions.
Excuse me, can I just ask
all
then,
the time.
are you saying that you've done things out differently than you would have done otherwise during this time?
Well, we adjust our strategies. Our commercial strategies evolve constantly to meet customer needs. So it's never ordinary times in our business. It's very competitive, and you have to react and be agile on your feet to gain customers. So we do. We negotiate hard with our customers. We try to mitigate the impacts of increases that we suffer. We try to come up with effective programs. We have good loyalty programs. We advertise over 10,000 products a week. We have long-term EDLP programs, savings programs in all of our banners.
I know I don't have much time. I know the programs that you have, and that was in your submission. I really appreciate it, Mr. LaFlèche, but I'm just trying to understand. Are you saying that you have done things, you've had greater price reductions, or you've tried to address the huge run-up in food costs that Canadians are facing right now, that you're doing anything differently than you would have had this not occurred, had we not had this huge food inflation?
We are delivering value to customers every day. That's what we do. That's what we committed to doing, and that's what we keep on doing.
Unfortunately, that puts us right at time. Thank you, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you, Mr. LaFlèche. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. LaFlèche, for returning to the committee.
None of them do.
I'm going to follow in the same vein. Minister Champagne gave us the impression that the meeting with the CEOs of the grocery stores had been productive. Can you tell us more specifically what you've done since that meeting? Has anything changed among your practices after having met with ministers? Have you adjusted anything? You said from the beginning that you continue to change things, but I would like to know what. As I explained to the minister, and as we said or demonstrated in our plan and list of things that we do for the consumers, we really do try to deliver the best value possible within a very difficult context. Yes, customers are impacted by inflation, and we have to address their needs. We have to give them the best value, the best products at the best prices every week and under all our banners. As I explained, this is a constantly evolving situation in a very dynamic environment. And so our goal is to be as relevant as possible and continue to offer the best value as we always have done. So I understand that you are offering the best value and that your meeting with Minister Champagne didn't change much. When you talk about the code of conduct, I do like what I'm hearing. I'd just like to confirm the information that I have. You participated actively and constantly and constructively to the discussions. Your company is ready to sign the code. Is that correct? Yes. I'd like to know your thoughts. There were some companies that were absent during those discussions. At the last minute, now they're saying that they won't sign the code of conduct. What will happen if it's not all the companies that sign the code? Well, in order for it to be an industry code, all the major participants have to sign it. As I said in the beginning, we think that that reflects the market conditions that we're operating under and how we operate with our suppliers. We hope that some of our competitors will accept the terms.
All it will do is
I understand that they have doubts.
down to Walmart prices, and
perhaps there are a lot
Loblaw
of legal
prices.
terms, and I don't want to talk about specific sections or anything, but the code as such is satisfactory to us. I think that it's a good starting point. Do you think that this code will have an impact on reducing prices short term? I didn't say that. The goal is not to regulate prices or inflation. The code is to ensure the maximum amount of transparency and clarity between suppliers and retailers. I think that that is
that's
what the
problem.
code
And that's why you
is
won't see any
proposing,
difference in
and
the
it
prices
reflects
for groceries
what
because
Metro already
it's the
does.
government.
So we should
government's
be able
been
to
the
hope
issue
for
in the
more
beginning. It's just
stable
they're trying to
prices.
push blame off
Well,
to-
no, I think the
Like
question of
Loblaws
prices
and Walmart are almost at cost for
and
a lot of products.
what
so
impacts the prices is not
that's
the
why they
code.
backed out
The
of it. They
code
can't afford
really
to do it.
manages the relationships, who can do what and when, and the conditions surrounding
a company's
that.
gotta
But
make
the
some sort of
prices
profit.
of various resources, that has nothing to do with the code. Of course, the code also aims to bring more transparency to the industry.
Yeah, like if you
As
buy
you
Coke
said,
at Walmart, it's
the
$1
last time you
something.
were
go to
here,
Metro, it's
I asked you
$3.99.
the same
Like,
question I
there's a
asked
huge
others.
price
We
difference.
wanted to know what the
Metro
profit amounts
and,
were. We were told by other companies
Mr.
that
Thompson's Independence
that was
or
not from the
whatever
grocery
main
store.
is,
And we
Miles
were told that we
Independence.
could not receive those specific numbers.
price
If
gaps,
I
big time.
remember correctly,
Their prices have always been inflated.
you said yes to providing those numbers to the Competition Bureau. Everybody said that they would do it. But in the first pages of the report, the Competition Bureau says that they did not get all of the required numbers. Did you send in your numbers? Yes, we collaborated with them and cooperated, and we did send them the profit margins between our food products and the pharmacy products. So you were transparent about that? Yes. How do you explain the fact that others
Now, I
did not
bet you
supply
if you guys went out
the
and did your
numbers?
own research
I
and you
can't
looked at
answer
what the
that. They
profit
did
margins
ask
were
us
for
certain
Metro
details that we
and
did not
compared to
actually
what the
have, but
profits-
everything
profit
about profit
margins were for,
margins
like,
between the
I
food
don't know,
products and
Sobeys or
pharmacy
something
products,
like- or,
we did supply those
Loblaws,
numbers to the
There'd be a huge difference because
Competition
Metro
Bureau.
has, they
Right now,
always
there is a
have had
bill on the
crazy high
table
prices.
in order to give
But if you
more
walk into
power to the
Walmart now,
Competition
you can look at some
Bureau.
of the great value stuff.
Another
and
question.
it's more
We
expensive
also
than the
want
brand
to see
name.
how we can increase competition
you
in
gotta
the
look at
industry,
some of those
perhaps
too.
introduce new participants or actors. How does your company see more competition in the grocery industry? Is that positive? As I've said, this is a very competitive industry with very major players. Some of them are international, some of them are more local, independent, and they come from all backgrounds. The industry is part of a free market, and therefore there are no barriers to other participants participating. And so those who want to enter the market can do that. So it would not be a negative thing to increase competition. No, competition is never negative. Everything is always better with competition. We agree on that. Thank you, Mr. Laflèche. Thank you, Mr. Perron. You respected your time. Now, on to Mr. McGregor.
Mr. Chair, just before I give my 6 minutes to Mr. Boularice, my colleague here, I just want to read a notice of motion into the record. It goes as follows, that given the recent opposed votes in the House of Commons to supplementary estimates B, specifically vote 1B in the amount of $16,108,492, Vote 5B in the amount of $11,383,559, and vote 10B in the amount of $34,211,000 for the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, and vote 1B in the amount of $19,763,134 for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. The committee undertake a study to examine the effect negative votes on these supplementary estimates would have had on food safety, market access, and on farmers, ranchers, and producers, that the Parliamentary Budget Officer be included as a witness to provide analysis of these effects, that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report.
What?
With that, I'll
what
give my
saying.
6 minutes to Monsieur Boulris.
Merci, Monsieur McGregor. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Laflèche, for being here today. A few weeks ago, Minister Champagne proudly said that he had asked you firmly to be here and come to Ottawa to meet with you. He seemed very proud of this. He wanted to talk to you about stabilizing prices. A few weeks later, you gave an interview on TVA. You candidly shared that this had no impact on your practices, nor on any specials. It was during Thanksgiving, and the turkey was still on sale, as it is every year. If your meeting with Minister Champagne was not constructive, is that because Minister Champagne isn't very convincing, or because he doesn't really have any power to convince you? The meeting with him demonstrated his intentions, and we understand them. Everybody is concerned with food price inflation. Meeting with stakeholders in order to stabilize prices, I participated, and I said that we are doing our best across all our stores and banners to stabilize prices as much as possible and provide the best sales as well. We did it before the meeting, and we've been doing it since. So it has had no impact, that meeting. You are still trying to offer the best prices. That's not what I said. I said what I said to the minister. We made two commitments: deliver value to our customers. We are very conscious of doing that. And two, signing the code. That's what I committed to, and that's what we are respecting.
The problem with our country is
here's
the
a question for
monopoly
you.
we have.
Let's
we have
say
the biggest
there is a child who wants to work
area.
at Super C or Metro.
Whether
How
it's
much
grocery,
does a cashier
telecommunications,
make at Metro?
it's
More
ridiculous.
than minimum wage. So $15, $16, where the minimum wage is $15,
why
so
they're
more
allowed
than
to
that.
get away with
Our
price
employees
gouging.
actually have collective agreements. I know that. We have a lot of unionized employees. 95% of them are. We find that our salaries are competitive. Speaking of salaries, what was your remuneration for 2022? I wonder how that's pertinent or relevant today. Well, I think that more than $5 million plus a bonus, you make about 155 times more than the cashier who works for you. Don't you think that that's indecent?
And that's what's
No,
ridiculous.
my salary
How much money
is
this
something
dude
that
is
needs to
making.
be
He's making more
spoken to
money
the board of
than he
directors
needs to
about.
spend in a
I
year, for sure. He
am
could-
not
he
in the
could
right
live a
position to talk about it.
crazy,
My salary is actually normal and
extravagant
competitive. We are a
lifestyle
very large company,
a quarter
and of
of
course
that.
we have to attract some talent in order to manage the company properly. The salaries are actually, or this kind of remuneration is actually competitive and a bit lower than other companies. But do you understand the frustration of some people who are having a hard time buying groceries and then see how much money a CEO is making when they have to deprive themselves of
Capitalism.
certain
That's the problem. Capitalism
certain
is-
food items,
a lot of-
and they see CEOs making $8-9 million and getting bonuses. I'm in touch with people who are having a very hard time right now, and they don't feel that you're making
just get richer and richer
enough of
and
an
richer.
effort. I understand that people are having a hard time. And I understand that those are big amounts of money. No one's saying the opposite. But that is a competitive salary, and this is a competitive market. I understand what you're saying.
You'll hear Kevin O'Leary go on
and
about
I understand that people
capitalism,
feel
how
that
he
that's a lot
loves
of
it so
money.
much. But what
We
he
do need
won't
people
tell
at the
you
head of
is that
the
market's
company
already
who
been
are
used
well
up.
paid.
That means,
However, it is really competitive when
opening up a
three
business and trying to make a
companies
huge
are
corporation today isn't going to go anywhere.
managing 75% of the market in Quebec. It's more of an oligopoly, isn't it? I
markets have
disagree.
all been
The
flooded by
percentages
huge giants.
vary. It's 5 major companies who have 70 or 75% of the market share. So with Walmart and Costco, 5 companies have about 70% of the market share. But you really have to look at every market, every region, every province. There is a lot of competition in each of those markets. When you look at national statistics, it does give you an idea, but it is a very competitive market. We are up against Walmart, Costco, Amazon, which are international companies on top of the Canadian competition that we have. So I don't at all accept the analysis that we're not competitive. Thank you, Mr. Laflèche and Mr. Boulris. Now, Mr. Barlow for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Laflèche, for being here with us today. Now, my colleague asked this question earlier on, but I just want to dive a little bit deeper into that. You said in the Quebec media that when you met with the Prime Minister or the Minister of Industry, you provided, or the grocery CEOs provided the government with a list of recommendations on steps that the Liberal government could take to try and help reduce food costs and be a partner in this effort.
That's the question.
But you said that the government has not followed through on those recommendations. I believe you said that in your in the answer to my colleague, but if I'm incorrect, do so.
Politicians
but can you tell us the specifically what recommendations you suggested to the Liberal government, steps to take to help reduce food costs?
By the way, the House of Commons.
So I will correct my statement to Madame Ruda. We did not make firm recommendations to the government to reduce food costs. Government plays a role. There's on regulations, employment laws, immigration. Yes, we made general recommendations, but we didn't come back and say the government didn't respect those commitments. We didn't say that. So I don't know.
Sorry, I'm just from your comments in the media, you were saying that the government has not followed through on taking steps. I'll try and find the direct quote, but I did see that. Is that?
I'm sorry, but I don't think I said that.
Okay. What has Metro done an analysis or anything specific regarding the cost of the carbon tax on your brand, on the Metro brand, in terms of increase on energy bills, transportation, heating and cooling, all of those types of things? Have you done an assessment on what the cost of that is to Metro?
No, we have not done a formal assessment. As far as I know, we don't pay a carbon tax today. If carbon taxes are put into effect, we will be impacted by them because we are at the end of a long supply chain. So producers along the line that pay it will have cost increases and will ask their prices to us to be increased. So like any tax or regulations that increases costs, that could and probably will have an impact on retail price inflation.
Oh, hell yeah. CBC.
So I'm a little why would you think that Metro isn't paying carbon taxes? You'd have stores in Ontario, which would be paying carbon tax on energy, and you'd be, when you're getting deliveries on products,
we pay our energy bills, we pay fuel.
Right.
So I don't have a specific carbon tax component. We pay taxes.
Well, I would encourage you, Mr. Laflèche, as the CEO for Metro, to take a look at those bills. They will have an element on that bill specifically telling you what your carbon tax is on every single delivery and on your heating bills in your stores. I think that would be important for Metro to understand the costs that you are being burdened, that I'm assuming those additional costs you're having to pass on to consumers. This isn't something Metro would be eating, I wouldn't think.
Well, energy bills in Ontario have declined a little bit over the last little year, so that's why I'm not seeing the carbon tax specifically. But I'll make a note of it. We'll get back to you.
Thank you. Can you,
why
what would be the impact on, as my colleague had asked you earlier about the plastics ban?
Premier. Doug Ford's an idiot.
This isn't a matter of increased cost. One other consequences of this, from what we understand, is there would be actually a number of items would no longer be available. Where United States produce companies, for example, would refuse to meet these new regulations and would just no longer import to Canada. And I'm thinking bagged salads, peppers, cucumbers, all of these types of things. Have you done an assessment on that? What would the consequences of that be, not being able to bring in produce from the United States as a result of the new plastics ban? And again, this isn't the single-use plastics. This is plastics for fresh produce.
So I don't have a specific answer or analysis on that specific category, but like I said earlier, it could add to costs, and it could increase food waste. So through the RCC, we made our concerns known to the government, and we'll leave the policymakers to make the decisions.
The Prime Minister had said when this all was initiated regarding bringing in the CEOs, which this committee did 6 months earlier, so this was not anything abnormal. But he said if their plan doesn't provide real relief for the middle class and people working hard to join it, so I would say that isn't just freezing prices, that is a price reduction, ensuring there's relief there, then we will take further action. We are not ruling anything out, including tax measures. Mm-hmm. If the government were to increase taxes on you as a way to try and force you a windfall tax or something along that line, is that something that a grocery retailer such as Metro would just absorb? Or would tax increases would have to be passed on to consumers?
To the consumers.
Well, we think this is a bad idea, and this will do nothing for food price inflation.
That Trudeau would try to pass a windfall tax onto corporations, and then that would trickle down to the consumer.
We'll now turn to the Pride of Malpeque.
That's exactly
Mr. McDonald, over to you.
Bastard's going to be trying to do.
There you go.
Thanks, Cody. Mr. LaFlèche, I want to start, kind of lead into where my colleague actually ended off, but we've had over the past 2 or 3 years some extreme climate changes. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see the general public, obviously because they're being affected in many different ways, including our farmers, our producers, manufacturers, whether it be supply chain issues or whether what have you. If there's initiatives put in place to help reduce climate change and our GHG emissions and so on and so forth, and if an organization as big as Metro didn't apply or at least try, would that have any effect on your business?
Climate change is a big factor and has an impact on the cost of many food products. That's a fact. It contributes to the severe weather events that you referred to have contributed to food price inflation, no doubt about it, over the past few years. So again, the climate change and the rules to fight climate change are a bigger issue than ourselves, and we will conform by all the laws that are adopted by Parliament.
Okay. And you currently have a supplier code of conduct. And yes. I'm just wondering, is there any similarities around the development of the grocery code of conduct with your supplier code of conduct? Like if you're doing this partially for suppliers, I'm just wondering, is there any similarities than what you've seen?
Well, our supplier code of conduct deals with the norms that our suppliers must follow on safety, workplace safety, security. It's just to make sure that we're dealing with the right companies. So the code of conduct is how they treat their employees, how they deal with us.
Well, how they
so there's some similarities, but the grocery code of conduct that's before us is more on the terms between a vendor and a retailer.
Okay. And, we recently heard from one of your competitors that the code of conduct would actually increase food costs and not have the desired effect.
It would happen whether or not we were here
or not here. What's your opinion regarding the grocery store code of conduct in that regard? Is there an effect there, or is it too early to determine?
Well, like I said to an earlier question, we don't think the prices or the costs that we will negotiate with our vendors will change with the code or without the code. So we don't have the same reading as one of our competitors has on the inflation risk caused by the code itself. That's our position.
And just, so getting back to suppliers, like, has there been any communication with your suppliers and relevant to the code of conduct?
I have not communicated myself, but they are part of the working group, of which we are also part of with others. So their association representatives are members of that working group. So I think are a few representative of large CPGs. So they're they participate in the development of that code.
So this is something that you're endorsing and you're willing to sign on to.
Yes.
Has it been? I just want to take it. And I know it's you speaking on behalf of your board of directors. So has it been ratified at your board of directors level?
Well, our board is informed of these matters on a regular basis. So they're fully aware that we're willing to sign this code. And yes, they have endorsed it.
That's right, Rainer. That's exactly what they want to do.
Part of, and I want to go back a little bit to climate change because I think it's going to be an integral part of maybe not the grocery store code of conduct, or maybe it will be, but the effects that it's having on
this
when you
code
hear
of conduct is a joke.
In California, the drought, and say for romaine lettuce, we all seen last year go to $8 or $9 a head. How serious are the grocery stores seeking information or input on these outcomes? Like, where are you at with that? How do you have a research team basically that's looking at how we're going to this is going to roll out in the future when we see continuously climate change issues around the world? I mean, Canada is not alone in this, so I'm just wondering, what can you tell this committee what you guys are doing to ensure that you're very aware of what's going to take place so your consumers are not paying $8 or $9 for a head of lettuce from California?
Well, we don't grow the lettuce. We are a distributor and a retailer, so we will source product at the most effective cost possible. And so we're always looking for alternative sources.
Yeah, most of them won't say that it's the carbon tax.
There can be issues. There can be crop issues in certain parts of the world, so we have to seek alternative sources.
With the WEF.
And those are market prices.
So why would they want to say that it's the carbon tax?
It's just a fact of the business marketplace affecting commodities
worldwide.
Like that. So our responsibility is to try to source the product at the best cost possible, and that's what we try to do.
I have to leave it at that, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 seconds.
Now on to Mr. Perron for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Laflèche, I'd like to come back to the code. We had the CEO of Loblaws here recently, and they were not at the table for the negotiations. They said that they were represented by a retail organization and by yourself. Do you feel that you represent Loblaws when you are in those discussions? The two retailers that are part of the working group are a representative of Sobeys and one of Metro. But you don't represent Loblaws there, do you? No. It's a working group that is trying to come up with a solution that will be acceptable for everyone. They represent the retailers.
You're right, Stefan. Lettuce grows.
When you say that you don't think that the code will impact prices,
farmers, you're buying up land. Well, we get a lot more stuff in the United
Australia
States, so
and in UK, there was an impact on the prices on medium term.
So many elements involved.
And there was an impact on inflation. Why did you tell the minister that you are committing to this? The code is not there to address the price issue. That's about negotiations between a supplier and a retailer. What we said to the Minister Champagne was that we committed to signing the code because that's what he asked us to do. He said it would be important for customers' trust, and we said that we're committing to doing it. So you are continuing your practices, but you're signing the code, and there will not be any changes with regards to prices. What will happen if not all the companies will sign it? You said earlier that it wouldn't work. Do you think that the government in that case should force or enforce a code? I'm convinced that we can find a solution determined by industry players. We are almost there already. Some companies have doubts, and I will let the lawyers do their work in order to come to a solution, and I hope that we will be able to draft a code of conduct. What kind of price variations can we expect for consumers in the coming weeks? Do you think that inflation will go lower again? We continue to see that inflation is lowering vis-a-vis last year. There's a bit of a decline with regards to the prices, and that is lesser inflation than last year. For the past 3 semesters, we have seen inflation declining quite rapidly. Our next trimester will be finishing in December, and we will announce our numbers at the end of January. So I think that things are decreasing, but there will be a little bit of inflation still. Thank you. Now on to Mr. Boulris for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Laflèche, the current situation is so difficult in some ridings, for example, La Petite Patrie, which I represent. I went to a spaghetti dinner. People in the neighborhood did a fundraising event to help people in the neighborhood. 70,000 Quebecers went to a food bank this year. That is a 32% increase from 2022, which is horrible. Now you're saying that you haven't changed your practices since meeting with Minister Champagne, and the code of conduct will not impact the prices, even though it will improve trust. How can you provide hope to people for them to feed themselves properly? I have a lot of empathy for the situation you're describing. We are very close to food banks in Quebec and in Ontario. We are a big partner of food banks at Metro and have been for a long time. We have made fantastic donations in recent years because there's a lot of demand. We think that this is a very regrettable situation. This is a societal issue. Food security is very important. There are some factors that have nothing to do with grocery stores, and you know those factors better than I do. The government probably has a bigger role to play with regards to food security. As a company, we are trying to give the best prices possible. Exactly. We have stores that are cheaper, for example, and we are doing our best to respond to people's needs. Of course, people who work in food banks, unfortunately, are people who actually work full-time already. That's a new trend. In recent months, the inflation of food prices was higher than regular inflation. I know you don't have much time, and it's a complex question. This gives us the impression that global inflation is challenging, and food inflation is even worse. Well, food inflation is now closer to general inflation rates. There was indeed a certain gap. That is an effect that was felt worldwide. The war in Ukraine, shortages, those factors are well known, and they provoked food price inflation worldwide. Canada is actually doing all right. We know that things are costly and it's a difficult situation, but we're better than other countries in Europe or in the G7. We are trying to provide the best value, and our profit margins have not increased in the past 2 years, and I think it's important to highlight that. Yes, our the amount of money in total has increased, but not our profit margins. Thank you. So on to the Conservatives and Mr. Drouin. We will start with Mr. Lehoux for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Laflèche, for being here today. First question. I wanted to talk about plastic bans. My colleague talked about it earlier. That will certainly have an impact on the prices of fruits and vegetables that we import. We had a clear example about plastic that is used to wrap cucumbers when they're out of season in Quebec and in Ontario. especially when we import them. We're talking about a 6-day life.
Yeah, the States are doing great because that's where most of our food goes.
Shelf life for these products.
Where a lot of our crops
I'd like
go.
to know what you think of that plastic ban and what the impact will be on food waste and on price increases. I can't tell you the exact impact for Metro. I can't tell you how much money it would cost, but we did express our concerns during consultations to the RCC. With regards to what you're mentioning, there might be an increase of prices, and if there is a decrease of shelf life, but it's more expensive, then we don't think it's a viable solution. We are doing a lot to counter that kind of waste. We don't want to have more food waste, and we have to give it some serious thought. You met the minister. I'll quote you. We didn't need the minister to ask us to make such efforts. We've already been making those efforts daily. I understand that this is what you said after meeting with him. However, we have a policy that is putting pressure on the food industry and on your company. What are your thoughts? I have difficulty with you saying that you've met the with actually the minister saying that they've met with the CEOs and there will be repercussions if they don't follow what we're proposing. Well, we have a commitment to delivering value to our customers and offering the best prices. We've always done it, and we'll keep doing it, and we are doing it even more now in a context of inflation.
It's just
that is our
on a show. It's all
biggest commitment.
It's a liberal show. It's a clown
The commitment
show.
I made to the minister, I'm repeating myself here, but we kept that commitment. There's been an impact with regards to the agreements you had with suppliers. You said that there's not a lot of flexibility, but maybe there is. Can you tell our colleagues what you're asking for? We're putting pressure on you for you to reduce prices. I'm concerned that that will have an impact on suppliers, and they will have a hard time making ends meet. Can you provide us with that kind of information? With regards to the penalties that we charge our suppliers when they are late or don't have a full package, those are terms in our contracts that are well known. Of course, we always try to find a solution to that. Yes, there are some fees that can happen. However, it's not what happens with the majority of our agreements. But can we have a copy of those agreements? We don't share those, but I understand your question. We talked about the carbon tax earlier. You said you haven't made a specific calculation on that, but I'd like you to provide us with some numbers. Everything we purchase, and you say that in Quebec it is not applicable, but it is applicable indirectly. Of course, that has an impact on what we buy food-wise, especially with regards to transportation and anything that is imported. Well, somebody is picking up that bill. Do you agree? Yes, I agree. As I said earlier, taxes will increase prices, and eventually that will have an impact on retail prices. It might take some time, but there will be an impact. The impact on Metro, I will try to provide you some numbers, but I don't have the answer right now. I'm sorry, that's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Laflèche and Mr. Lew. Now on to Mr. Drouin for 5 minutes.
You can't even have a greenhouse without having a carbon tax.
Thank you, and Mr. Laflèche, thank you for being here once again. Hopefully we will be leaving you alone for the rest of this term. Next Parliament will decide for themselves. You were here a few months ago. One of the reasons we are studying this issue is because of Metro and your other competitors are operating in an oligopoly. This market has 5 major retailers. Can you explain to me the following? Is it normal for there to be a price freeze in November? Mr. Charlebois said that this was normal in November, that all of the major players announced that in November. Has Metro's behavior changed? Last time, one of your competitors told us that in November they would ask for a price freeze on XYZ, but this time we're doing it on ABC. I want to know why everybody announces this in November. I can't speak for the others, but for Metro, we have a blackout on prices that we receive from suppliers. So we don't accept any increases from November 1st to February 1st. This has been a long-standing policy at Metro. I don't know what the others do. That is a practice that exists at Metro. Here's the impact. We have other things to take care of than just negotiating with our suppliers. We want to serve our customers properly. We want to give them good prices, and it is the holidays, so things are busy. This is a long-standing policy at Metro. In the meantime, grocery store products, so I'm not talking about commodities like fruits and vegetables or meat, but dry goods, the prices will remain stable in our stores because we have refused increases, and that's good for the customer. We've talked about the grocery store code of conduct. I know that Metro is in favor for the code. Are you concerned that other retailers are saying that they disagree with this code of conduct? What if other provinces implement their own? I know there will be meetings soon. What if other provinces decide to take on their own code unanimously? Is that something that's concerning for you? Because you will be operating differently. Yes. Of course that is concerning. We would like for this code to be guided by the industry with everybody signing on. Those who have doubts, I hope that we will be able to answer their questions. There's not been an agreement yet, but we should continue the discussion in order to find a common language. I do know many lawyers, so I think that this can take some time, but let's hope to have some answers quite quickly. This was announced 2 years ago. The working group was announced 2 years ago. What would you say if the government said something, for example, well, it's been 2 years that this has been going on. We're going to just mandate you. Do you want to participate or not? Or do you have full confidence that the industry will come to an agreement? Well, I think we're close to our end goal. We would have to double down on efforts in order to have something in writing. And I think that would be a positive step if we can move on to something else. I know that there's a lot of pressure from the media side, but we're also preoccupied with the oligopolies in other supply chains in the food industry. Governments should not be intervening in a free market, but governments do have to intervene when the market shares are too big for specific players. That's why we're here.
It's a crazy monopoly for capitalists.
I would have loved to hear if that the industry wanted a code of conduct, but sometimes we just need to nudge a little bit. So I'm very happy that you agreed with your the 2 other competitors for a code of conduct, and I hope the other 2 will join on. Well, I reject the idea that we are not a competitive industry. This is a very competitive industry. Thank you, Mr. Drouin and Mr. Laflèche.
Voilà, collègues.
And so that was our first panel, and it is over. Thank you, Mr. Laflèche. Merry Christmas, and thank you once again for your presence in person. Colleagues, we will suspend for a couple of minutes for the second panel. Thank you very much.
What do you think about that? I think that was a load of crap and a waste of taxpayers' money. Metro and those stores aren't doing anything to lower prices. I don't know if you've been in there, but I have not seen any prices go down. In fact, I have seen the cost in those stores go up. I was in there the other day. I was walking down the aisles and I was just blown away by how inflated the prices have gotten over the last 3 months even. It's ridiculous. Walmart's brand. Okay, so if you go and buy oatmeal, right? Go to the oatmeal section in Walmart and grab a box of, say, maple brown sugar oatmeal, and then grab the Quaker maple brown sugar oatmeal and look at the prices. The Walmart brand is actually more expensive than the brand name stuff. It's ridiculous. It's the same with Loblaws and Metro. Most of their no-name stuff is now is more expensive than the actual brand. The only way that we're going to solve this problem is removing the liberals, because they have a backwards way of thinking that doesn't do anything. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't fix any problems. In fact, their solutions often lead to more problems. It'll only be a couple minutes before they start back up again. Yeah, well, we import everything from all over the place, and that's why it's so expensive to us. That's why we pay a fortune. It's because we never keep any of our own products here. And it's the same with like the meat. Walmart's meat. It will say grade A Canadian beef or something. That ain't no Canadian beef. I don't know where you got that stuff, but that's like rubber rubbed in shit. It's probably the worst meat I've ever eaten in my life. I can go down to my local butcher and get grade A Canadian beef. And that stuff's phenomenal. Even the Dollar Tree. I don't know how many people go to the Dollar Tree every once in a blue moon or whatnot. But in the last 2 months or 3 months or so, they've actually went from being a dollar store to a few dollar store now. Just like the other dollar store. True North had an interview with Pierre Poilievre. Well, they also have an open market where they have lots of competition. That's the thing in the United States, is that they have massive amounts of competition. Here in Canada, everything is monopolized. Like our cell phones, our grocery stores, like most of the industries are monopolized here. But when you go to the United States, there's like 100 different grocery store chains, and they're all competing against each other. So that's what drives down prices. That it's always been the problem here in this country, and this is why we always paid the most, is because, you know, for the longest time, you know, I remember growing up, there was only one phone company. Or, you know, when cell phones came out, there was only like 2 big cell phone providers. Like, now there's 3, and a bunch of little guys that branch off from the big guys. And that goes to show, okay? So if you look at it this way, all these small companies like Tech Savvy and the other little guys that rent lines from the big ones or service from the big companies, you know, it just goes to show that they can actually lower the prices. The big guys can lower their prices and still make a profit, because if the little guys, if they can sell it to the little guys that sell it to us for a lot less, then they could just directly sell it to us for a lot less. Yeah, you know, a lot of people, the attacks from the left is insane towards Pierre Poilievre. Like, I've been in like Facebook groups and on other channels and stuff like that, and you never really hear, at least I personally haven't heard, the right bashing the left. Normally, you know, it's direct attacks towards Justin Trudeau. But I find the left always attacks the support of Pierre Poilievre and Pierre Poilievre himself. They don't want him. They don't want him as our prime minister, but too bad. That's exactly what's going to happen unless Justin Trudeau pulls, you know, the UBI out of his ass, which he'll probably do. He'll pull a Kathleen Wynne. And then, you know, 6 months before the election, he'll be like, oh, well, we're going to introduce UBI. And then they introduce UBI and everyone votes for him, and Pierre Poilievre loses. And then he goes back on his word on everything else, and the country is in chaos again. Like, they're talking about how much they pulled children out of poverty, and, you know, like, it's... Have you been outside? Have you looked at these tent camps? Like, people, there's, in families, like the amount of kids that are going to the school breakfast clubs, or, you know, their families are going to food banks, is unreal. It's unprecedented. It's just, I don't know how they believe that we think that what they're saying is real. It's bullshit.
I would now like to
All right, we're back.
Call the meeting to order for the second panel. Welcome, colleagues. This afternoon, we have the Association des producteurs maraîchers du Québec, so that's Mr. Patrice Léger-Bourgoin, who is the general manager, and Catherine Lessard, deputy director general. I understand that there is a technical issue for Ms. Lessard, but perhaps it'll be possible to resolve the issue. With the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, we have Mr. Ron Lemaire, the president. Mr. Lemaire is also having some technical problems, but hopefully the technicians will be able to solve the issue. And finally, with the Centre for Future Work,
who is the economist and director. So we'll have 5 minutes for each opening remarks. That's going to have to be Mr. Pierre Léger-Bourgoin. But I just want to take une petite moment de reconnaître le petit...
I'd like to welcome Mr. Leroux's grandson. He is here in the room with us. If I'm not mistaken, his name is Éloi. And I believe that he is a student and he's in high school. So just a little wave, Eloi. Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Mr. Léger-Bourgoin, for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the committee, for having us here today. Forecasting food prices is considered a perilous exercise in normal times. The current extraordinary geopolitical, economic, and climate context marked by the wars in Ukraine and Israel, sustained interest rate rises, and the changes of the weather affecting agricultural production make reasonable predictability all the more difficult. That said, of course, there is a difficulty with regards to supply and demand. That said, in our opinion, the initiatives that can support price stabilization efforts in the fresh fruit and vegetable sector are as follows. Over the past 30 years, industry consolidation has exponentially reduced the number of wholesale channels. The number of independent fruit factories, affiliated owners, regional banners, and cooperatives have melted like snow in the sun in Quebec. As a result, the industry has reinvented itself by implementing supplier relation strategies based on the charging of fees, fines, and penalties. This approach has boosted the revenues of food retail chains. It also had the effect of substantially increasing suppliers' fixed costs to the detriment of the consumer. This would have been extremely difficult to achieve had the food retail industry not become an oligopoly over the course of many years. Now the damage has been done, and therefore remedies must be put in place to mitigate the effects of this oligopoly. The Code of And of course, that does not mean reducing competition, but rather consolidation can have positive impacts. The Code of Conduct is a good start in order to have better balance between small family companies and major companies. We must not let the two chains who appeared here last Thursday sabotage this initiative. The comments made by their representatives were worrying. Access to a strong local market for fresh fruit and vegetable production is fundamental to stabilizing food prices by reducing the number of players and costs in the supply chain. The competitive capacity of Quebec market gardeners is being undermined in a very concerning way. The Canadian and Quebec business environment must be comparable with those of our competitors in order to ensure the competitiveness of local companies. However, this is not the case. A study we commissioned last year, financed by Quebec's Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Agri-Food, came to a damning conclusion. The environment the regulations affect the competitiveness of Quebec fruit and vegetable growers in relation to their competitors, particularly in the U.S. and Mexico. Favorable regulations in our sector are a determining factor in companies' ability to compete at a time when local produce is in direct competition with imported fruit and vegetables, as Mr. Laflèche said moments ago. Provincial and federal levels of government need to be involved in reevaluating risk management approaches for vegetable production in the context of climate change. All stakeholders must clearly understand their risk management responsibilities. Wholesalers and retailers must also assume an increasing share of the risk. Governments need to create an environment conducive to investment that builds resilience to risk and the capacity to adapt and transform in response to climate shocks. In conclusion, price stabilization in the vegetable sector requires a more equitable relationship between producers, who are family-run businesses, and large multinational food retailers and wholesale giants. Greater equity between producer countries involved in international marketing, taking into account the weight of regulations, is imperative to ensure the country's food security. Finally, it is unacceptable that vegetable growers should have to assume disproportionate risk management in the current climate change context. To finish, we have a few recommendations to make. should the 5 major food chains fail to sign the Code of Conduct, we have put forth an initiative leading to legislation to provide a better framework for commercial relations, and lawyers are already involved in this. So once again, we can talk to jurors about this question, but let's insist on the fact that they have been present from the very beginning of these discussions. Secondly, we'd like to implement the recommendation of the grocery affordability report to ensure reciprocal standards for imported products and launch a program. Mr. Laflèche said that he wanted the best prices no matter what. What we're saying that these companies have a responsibility to ensure customers' food security. They need to make sure that Canadian laws and standards are respected no matter where the product is coming from. We are also aiming to launch a program to encourage support technological innovation and the development of new products. Finally, we, in partnership with vegetable and industry and the Quebec government, want to review risk management programs such as agri-stability. Thank you, Mr. Bourgoin. And I'm sorry, I called you Pierre instead of Patrice earlier.
Mr. Lemaire, we're going to give you a shot, and hopefully this got figured out. So why don't you just say a few words and say hello, and then we'll see if it works.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for including me. I hope my volume is working for the translators. Is that strong enough for translation services?
Yeah, we're going to give it a shot. Okay, 5 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Lemaire. Go ahead.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. On behalf of the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to talk about food prices in Canada. CPMA represents over 830 companies growing, packing, shipping, and selling fresh fruit and vegetables in Canada. That drives $15 billion within the industry and across the country. We are a unique entity that addresses the entire food system and the complexity of how fresh produce moves from farm
I'll have to
to
stop you there, Mr. Lemaire. I think we're having issues with translation. I see some of my francophone. There is no translation. Okay, gotcha. I don't know. Okay, he wants us to keep going, so we're gonna keep going. Go ahead, Mr. Lemaire.
From the top or from where I left off?
I think you're okay to go from the top. I know my colleagues know your subject matter pretty well, so we'll let you keep going from where you were.
Okay, wonderful. As noted by previous witnesses, there have been excessive cost pressures on both the supply chain and the consumer. While the produce industry is seeing market improvements, we are all still seeing parts of our system influenced by global markets and high-cost centers. As we saw last week, the 14th edition of Canada's Food Cost Report by leading Canadian universities shows projected increases of vegetables and other foods for 2024. It is critical to understand that the food system is complicated and there are no singular solutions to drive down food prices. Labor costs across the supply chain continue to rise. Production inputs remain high, ongoing high interest rates and high cost of borrowing, and the regulatory burden all play a factor in business. The changing climate is also an ongoing issue, and the cost of adjusting our supply chains to meet this challenge is extremely important to recognize. As some of the committee are aware, I chair a global coalition of fresh fruit and vegetables, which is focused on addressing supply chain issues. Earlier this year, we surveyed industry members on the global impact of cost to their business. The numbers are dramatic, and while these numbers are improving, they tell a complex story of why Canadians are paying more for their fruit and vegetables. In Canada, we reported packaging up 13%, labor costs up 18%, 60% cost increases to plant materials, cost to crop production inputs up 21%, energy costs on average up 24%, machinery and equipment up 20%. While retail wasn't included in this survey, I have had conversation with retailers in Canada, and costs in their operations are up as well. While we are seeing food inflation slowly decline, these impacts continue both on consumer and our sector. Our concern now is declining fruit and vegetable consumption. In Q4 of 2023, we are seeing Canadians' daily consumption drop by a serving. And if this continues, our data shows an increased cost of approximately $1 billion annually to our healthcare system. According to our numbers, we know that fresh produce typically moves in the opposite direction of the Consumer Price Index, CPI, not inflation specifically. CPI has dropped in October, and I would have expected consumption to increase, but it's not the case. Consumers are still reducing consumption, and this is a concern. I think Mr. McGregor talked at committee earlier about the projected cost of food in 2024 increasing, and we are very, very concerned where this is going. The government of Canada needs to look at food as essential and frame policy to support this. The regulatory burden with proposed policy measures on packaging and heating costs are examples of driving up costs through poorly developed policy, measures that did not look at the unintended consequences. Before closing, I would like to note the Grocery Code of Conduct. We have heard a diversity of testimony. As a steering committee member and now interim board member of the code, I can attest to the fact that everyone is working hard to reduce and stabilize food prices. The process of developing a code has made all key industry players talk to each other in a way that has not happened in the past, but is positive moving forward. We may not have a perfect solution yet, but we are years ahead from where we were in 2020. Trade associations continue to work on solutions for all. While there's, I know, concern that not all major retailers are around the table, we are still negotiating. And I will tell everyone, it is a negotiation, and we continue to do so. In closing, we need to take a full food systems approach to finding a solution to food inflation. There is no silver bullet. We have a large geography to navigate, a diverse urban, rural, and remote community to serve. And the path forward needs to recognize all of these elements and consider all of the unintended consequences that could be developed through poor policy frameworks. Thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemaire. We'll turn it over to Mr. Stanford for up to 5 minutes, and then we're going to get to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Food price inflation has slowed down in recent months, and this is a very positive development. But it remains higher than overall inflation. Food prices increased 5.6% in the 12 months ending in October, compared to general inflation of 3.1%. In my judgment, an increase in profits collected at the retail stage of the food supply chain has made a measurable and sustained contribution to those continued high food prices. Supermarkets did not cause the outbreak of inflation that followed the COVID pandemic, but they did make it worse. I have prepared a submission, which I believe has been distributed to the committee, with updated data regarding prices and profits in the food retail sector in Canada. Let me briefly summarize the main findings. Based on profits realized in the first 9 months of this year, net income in the food retail sector will likely exceed $6 billion for 2023. That's up 8% from 2022 and sets a new all-time record. Food retailers are now earning more than twice as much profit as they did before the COVID pandemic. Basic mathematics refutes the claim that you've heard from supermarket CEOs that they have merely been passing on higher input costs to consumers. An industry cannot double its profits if it's merely passing on higher expenses. Measured as a share of total revenue, the net income margin of food retailers also remains elevated. The sector-wide profit margin was 3.3% of total revenue in the first 9 months of 2023. Again, more than twice as wide as it was in 2019. Now, this profit margin is widely misunderstood in popular discussions about food retailing. Supermarket CEOs often describe food retail as a low-margin business because final profits are a small percentage of total revenue. This does not mean that food retail is not a very profitable industry, however. The margin merely reflects the fundamental input-output structure of any business. Food retailers generally do not process or manufacture the products that they sell. They simply buy them from suppliers, add a markup, and sell them to consumers. Their business expenses are limited to functions directly related to the stores they operate. It's thus natural that profit margins relative to total costs, including the costs of those already made products, seem low. In contrast, profit margins for other industries that undertake more complex and vertically integrated functions like product development and manufacturing tend to be higher as a proportion of sales. Now, businesses, when they're investing capital, evaluate investment opportunities not according to which industry offers the widest sales margin, but rather the greatest return on invested capital. And since grocery stores are not a capital or technology-intensive undertaking, profits relative to the scale of capital invested in those stores can be quite significant. For example, in its latest financial report covering the first 3 quarters of 2023, George Weston Limited reported net income of about $2.7 billion over 9 months, up 12% from the similar period a year ago. Now, that may seem small relative to overall revenues, but it's large compared to the invested equity base in the company, which was $13.7 billion at the close of that period. That implies an annualized return on equity over the first 9 months of 2023 of 26.4%. So that is a very strong rate of profit by any definition. And the idea that grocery stores are a low-margin business is quite misleading. The sustained record profits in food retail contrast with profit trends elsewhere in the economy. And we've seen a decline in overall profits in 2023, which rose substantially right after the pandemic, but have moderated since. The same goes, interestingly, for the food processing sector, which also enjoyed strong profits initially after the pandemic, but have moderated since. Finally, I'd like to address the suggestions made by some observers that high food prices are caused by Canada's federal provincial carbon pricing system. There is no correlation in either historic data or international comparisons between carbon pricing and food inflation. In Canada, food price inflation was higher in years when increases in the national carbon price, which was phased in beginning in 2018, were smaller. So statistically, there's actually a negative correlation between changes in the carbon price and food inflation. U.S. food prices grew faster than in Canada on a cumulative basis since the pandemic, even though the U.S. has no carbon pricing system. I'll leave it at that. Thank you again, and I look forward to the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stanford. We now have Ms. Rood for 6 minutes. Over to you. Now, colleagues, we're only going to be able to get 2 rounds of questions in, so the 6 and then the one afterwards. So go ahead, Ms. Rood, 6 minutes.
Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Lemaire, it's my understanding that Sobeys and Metro directly participated in drafting the grocery code of conduct and helped to shape it. I'm just wondering if Loblaws, Walmart, and Costco were offered the same ability, and if not, why would they choose the Retail Council of Canada to represent them instead?
That's a great question. Thank you, Ms. Rood. I hope everyone can hear me fine. The opportunity to be part of the discussion around the steering committee, around the working group, and provide input through the steering committee was made to Loblaws and Walmart. They leveraged the opportunity to use the Retail Council of Canada and other channels and other association channels that were available to them. The very beginning, there was representation around the table from Loblaws, and that opportunity was available throughout the process.
Thank you very much. We've been talking a lot in this committee, and I've asked several people this question with regard to the proposed P2 plastics ban that the Liberal government is proposing. And we've heard that it's going to cost the industry $6 billion. And for the sake of those watching at home, can you tell us why the new proposed ban on plastics could essentially cripple the produce industry in Canada, and what effect it will have on consumers in terms of what it means for the availability of fresh produce in the grocery stores and the prices that consumers see? Like, what could we potentially see disappear from grocery store shelves, meaning what Canadians can no longer buy at grocery stores if this proposed ban goes ahead?
So this is very concerning, and I appreciate you bringing this up on committee. 90% of what packaging does, it does before the consumer sees it. So if this moves forward, the notice will remove all bagged salads. It will remove all value added. So all of the fresh cut clamshells of blueberries, strawberries, all of the product that you would get out of California, ship Mexico when we're not in season would be removed from the market just because it wouldn't be able to make the journey. We wouldn't have bananas in Canada because bananas are shipped in a plastic bag to Canada to control ripening and to control damage. So you would basically take out a significant portion of the market. You would add over 20% cost to produce that is available to the market. You would change the dynamic, even locally grown in Quebec, product coming out of the field shipped to local retailers would have a reduced shelf life. We would also see waste increase by 50%. We would see GHG emissions double by another 22 million. It's a dramatic impact to the industry and to the consumer.
Make a fortune.
Mr. Lemaire, in your meetings with ECCC, have they at all been open to your suggestions or pausing the timeline for implementation of the P2 plastics ban?
We have requested a pause and a regroup. I know the department is very focused on achieving a goal and trying to look at what solutions would be available. The discussion isn't about what the P2 notice looks like. It's about, is the P2 policy model the right model? And we don't think it is. We don't think it's functional within a complex food industry. It's going to create too many issues. And we provided 5 recommendations to the department that they could use to effectively move forward.
I'm just wondering if you could comment on how the carbon tax affects your suppliers that you represent, their input costs.
So right now, if we're looking at carbon tax, so the issue is carbon tax imposes, I'm going to take the greenhouse industry because it's one of the key industries in our sector that relies on natural gas to heat. And because of the nature and climate we live in, it's an essential part of their business. So right now, the greenhouse vegetable sector estimating about over $22 million annually due to the carbon tax. With the lack of an exemption that was denied coming out of the Senate, they're looking at an expected rise to 82 to 100 million by 2030. And I appreciate the other witness providing his commentary. That cost will be passed on. It won't be an immediate pass on, but there's no way the greenhouse industry can take on that burden of cost to move forward. And many of them are already relocating their operations in the U.S. and Mexico to satisfy production costs and competitiveness in the Canadian marketplace.
Mr. Lemaire, would you say it's harder to do business in Canada then? And what keeps potential suppliers out of the Canadian market?
It's a complex question. It is getting more and more complicated to do business. The challenge is beyond just the carbon tax. It's also including looking at the cost of borrowing, interest rates. You know, the complexity and layering of regulatory burden on the industry is becoming a challenge. Access to labor, the cost of labor, adding all of these pieces together drives opportunity to develop and invest in our own businesses, drives it down. Many growers are saying that they're not investing the way they would like to because of the uncertainty of the Canadian marketplace.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rood. Thank you, Mr. Lemaire. We'll have Mr. Drouin now for up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lemaire, I just want to build on what you're saying. Would you have some numbers to provide to committee in terms of greenhouse investments in Canada versus the U.S., for instance, which would be a comparable market? But a lot of the issues that you've brought up are access to labor in the U.S., same issues. Just talking to our counterparts down there, they also have worker programs, and they face the same labor crunch. It's the same issues in Europe where they face the same labor crunch. So I'm just curious to understand.
Combination.
Yeah, the combination, yeah.
It's the combination. So it's the energy, the tax incentives for investment. There's a range of different elements that link into that shift of investment from one country to the other. You add in the packaging. There's a range of elements that come into play. Sorry, the second part of your question. First was greenhouse.
Just because you've said there's more, like a lot of our members are now shipping down to the U.S. I just love to see the comparable, because that is, if that's in fact happening, that is concerning to me, and I'd love to see those numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So what I'm happy to do is I'm happy to sit down and we'll work with also the Ontario greenhouse vegetable growers and my chair, who actually was former president of the BC Hothouse, and look at where and how those cost centers truly does impact growth in the marketplace.
Okay, Mr. Stanford, thanks for your presentation, and I know it's not your first appearance before this committee. Obviously, you have created a report which outlines sort of the maybe the misconceptions that every grocer that's been before a committee says we are operating in a competitive landscape. Do you believe that they are operating in a competitive landscape when we're talking about the 5 major grocers who own 80% of the market share? Would that be the definition of an oligopoly, or would you say it is a tremendous competitive landscape right now?
Well, it certainly does fit the definition of an oligopoly, which is where the controlling share of a market is held not by one company, but by a few companies. So I don't think there's any question about that. Now, is it competitive? Oligopolies do compete with each other. There's no doubt about that. But they compete with each other in particular limited ways that don't necessarily conform to the assumptions of competition as it's taught in economics textbooks. So, there's not a black and white spectrum between competitive and non-competitive. There are ways in which they compete with each other, but there are ways in which they clearly don't. And I do think that the fact that this industry is so concentrated does help to explain why its profits have remained at these elevated post-pandemic levels, while other sectors in Canada have seen profits retrench towards pre-COVID norms, as some of those initial inspiring factors that cause the inflation, things like supply chain shortages and even energy prices, start to abate. Elsewhere, that has led to a slowdown in inflation and reduced profits. In the food retail sector, profits continue to grow, and that is an exception.
So the last time we had Mr. Weston before a committee in March, he said, yes, our profits have increased, but you got to look at our pharmaceutical side, which I don't think that's a more noble cause to find out you've increased profit margins on sick Canadians. I think it's disgusting. But do you agree with that statement from your analysis? I mean, I know you haven't provided the entire analysis that you've done, but you agree that the profit margins have increased specifically on food items?
Well, the data in my submission, sir, is from Statistics Canada's industry-wide data, in which companies are allocated to different sectors based on their primary business or their dominant business. So it would include all of the revenues and profits from supermarkets that happen to sell some pharmaceuticals on the side as well. And in that regard, we do see, as noted in my submission, the quantity of sales in real terms is shrinking over the last 2 years of high prices, and that would include, their attempts to diversify into other products, whether that's pharmaceuticals or clothing or other things that some of these chains are selling. Now, I am also puzzled by the logic of that argument. As a consumer, I don't really care whether I was ripped off in aisle A with the produce, or aisle C with the packaged food, or aisle F where they sell the Tylenol and other over-the-counter pharmaceutical products. So I don't actually see that argument helping them. If anything, the breadth of these companies' dominance, not just in one industry, food, but in others as well, further attests to the concern about the corporate power that this oligopoly is able to exert.
Thank you. Ma prochaine question serait pour Monsieur Bourgoin.
My next question is for Mr. Baudouin. It's a pleasure to see you. Last year, we said that we often see each other online. For the vegetable growing sector in Quebec, I think that the code of conduct is important. I think you even suggested that the government should probably regulate. Indeed, we negotiated for more than 2 years in order to come up with a code that would be satisfactory to retailers and suppliers. Now, 2 retailers at the very last minute are saying that they disagree. This is completely unacceptable. If these 2 retailers have certain positions and want changes to the wording of the code, well, then suppliers should have the same privilege. It was quite difficult at some times, and it required a lot of goodwill and good faith from all of the parties in order to strike compromises that for everyone. So it's the 11th hour. And going over certain parts of it is just unacceptable. Of course, if there's something, cosmetic, that's fine, but not to renegotiate everything. That's clear. Now, on to Mr. Perron for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Bourgoin, I will continue with you. In your opening remarks, you made some very quick recommendations, and I'd like to get back to them. And if you do have time, I'd like you to provide them to the committee in written format. First, you mentioned the importance of the government getting involved in risk management. Can you elaborate? In Quebec, we chose to have agriculture that is diversified and at a human scale. And we favored vegetable growers that are actually family businesses. So the risks are generally quite acceptable. But with climate change, almost the entire risk is shouldered by the small company, and therefore their economic viability is not as possible. I will let Catherine
Quebec is like
pursue and talk about
rest
the
of
changes
us
she
when it
would
comes
like.
to policy, like better policy.
Please let me know if there is a mistake, something with the mic. I understand that the sound is all right. Go ahead and we'll find out. Here's what we'd like. We'd like some adjustments to risk management programs. This would allow companies to face the future and climate change, especially with variations coming forth. The interpreter must interrupt. The sound quality is not adequate for interpretation.
C'est sûr qu'avec des changements climatiques, ça devient justifié qu'il y ait des variations, certaines mauvaises années qui peuvent se reproduire plus souvent qu'une fois par 5 ans. Donc, pour nous, c'est un changement majeur qu'il faudrait qu'il y ait pour Agri-Stabilité pour s'assurer qu'on prenne en compte les changements climatiques. Même chose également pour tous les programmes d'assurance récolte administrés par les provinces. Il faudrait également avoir une couverture qui est, je dirais, étendue de manière à faire face aux changements climatiques. Puis possiblement penser aussi à une assurance catastrophe dans des cas extrêmes. Alors, ce sont toutes des idées qu'on a de notre côté là, à la TMQ pour s'assurer qu'on puisse maintenir de l'activité maraîchère dans le futur. Puis qui dit une activité maraîchère stable dit aussi des prix stables dans le temps. Donc, tout ça est lié.
OK. Et merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Unfortunately, the interpreting services are unable to proceed. So very sorry, Ms. Lessard. Can I continue with Mr. Baudouin? Yes. I've stopped the time.
Finish because I wanted to make sure you had the answer and some of our Francophone colleagues, but for our English colleagues, there was no translation. So I let that happen. I used my discretion. You have 3.5 minutes left. Malheureusement, Madame Lessard, c'est pas...
Unfortunately, Ms. Lessard, it won't be possible for you to contribute due to your connection. So if I understand, or I do understand what you mentioned, Mr. Bourgoin, let's continue with you. We're told to review the risk management programs. My Liberal programs will say that they did the review in 2018. What do you say to that? Well, yes, rather for 2028. We say, yes, we can renew the whole thing for 2028, but climate change is really here. There were drastic events in Quebec this summer, and we have to be able to adapt to climate change. We had record rainfall in the summer. There was a freeze in June. Who would have thought that that was possible in June just a few years ago? And at the same time, the south of Quebec was had too much rain, and there was a drought in the north. So we have to continually reassess the program because climate change is impacting Quebec, Canada, and the whole world. You talked about creating an environment that would allow for investments in innovation with regards to risk management. Can you elaborate? Climate change will bring in new agricultural practices. We have to work with various stakeholders, scientists, companies who sell inputs, in order to adapt our farming processes to climate change. That it can be with regards to irrigation or drainage. That will bring us to reconsider how we do things and have done things for decades. We need the financial ability to face these challenges with regards to innovation. Small companies can't do that by itself. I'd like to remind you that the average farm in Quebec has to invest $500,000 at the beginning of a season before making any revenue at all. I'm not talking about profits. So for a small company, that is increasingly impossible. What will happen if we don't follow your recommendations and we don't reassess the risk management programs and we don't encourage investment? Let's say we just leave you alone with this risk management issue. What do you think will happen? 30 seconds. Well, people will have to work even harder to get fruits and vegetables around the planet because we won't be able to produce them here in Canada. This is already happening in Ireland. Last summer, there was not enough fresh fruit, or there was no fresh fruit or vegetables in Ireland last summer. And we have to avoid such a situation occurring in Quebec and Canada. Thank you. On to Mr. McGregor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses who are helping guide our committee through this study. Mr. Stanford, I'd like to start with you. And you know, we've now had 4 of the CEOs reappear before our committee. And you know, what struck me when Mr. Weston was here, and indeed from all of them, I think the reason why so many people across Canada have such a lack of trust in the grocery retail sector is because families from coast to coast to coast are struggling, and yet you see this corporate sector still doing quite well. And the reason why it's such an emotional issue is because they are selling not just any product, but the necessities of life. I mean, that's the thing, that we're all equal. We all need to eat to survive. And even if when it comes to their medications, that's still a reality. I know Mr. Weston's salary is about 431 times the average employee. None of the CEOs were able to tell this committee how many of their employees are using a food bank just to get by, even though that they may be working full time. But I really appreciate how in your handout to the committee over page 2 and 3, you know, you've really sort of illustrated the point that despite claims that this is a low-margin industry, that does not necessarily, and I think it's a misnomer, it doesn't reflect on the fact that it's not a profitable business. And I think to simply explain it, you can have relatively the same margin over a number of years, and so that may look low or static, but in grocery retail, it's doubled. You've shown that. But even so, if their gross revenues are going up, that margin is still going to translate into a fairly substantial profit. And we've seen that when you compare quarters year over year. Is there anything you just sort of wanted to add to that point from your opening remarks?
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. I do think that issue of the profit margin has been misunderstood and perhaps deliberately misportrayed as a sign that the industry is not actually profiting from food inflation. You know, we've heard the claim that if you buy $100 worth of groceries, well, only $3 to $4 of that actually went to the profits of the supermarket. We have to adjust that analogy today because the cart of groceries costs $200 now, not $100. So only $6 to $8 of it went to the profits of the supermarket. But still, that makes it seem inconsequential, and it's not. First of all, as I noted, food retail is not a capital-intensive industry, so the amount of invested capital in that sector is not high. It's barriers to new entrants, including the market power of the companies that are already there and have consolidated their power through all of the mergers and acquisitions that have occurred over the last generation that were detailed in that Competition Bureau report. Very helpfully. That's what keeps it so cozy as an oligopoly and has allowed them to take advantage of the uncertainty and the disruption associated with the pandemic to increase their margins. So first of all, it's false that the margins didn't increase. Secondly, even if they seem small, it's a large amount of profit relative to the capital that's invested.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. And I'm going to load up two questions here just in the interest of time. You have stated in your handout, in your opening remarks, that the carbon tax absolutely pales in comparison to the profits in the oil and gas sector as a driver of inflation. In previous handouts, you've shown that oil and gas over the last 3 years have seen their net profits increase by over 1,000%. Can you just sort of extrapolate from those massive profits in oil and gas, how that's affected food prices? Because I think we do need to look a little bit upstream. And also, I noticed that you also wrote a little bit in your handout about how even executives in the grocery retail sector are also doing stock buybacks and dividend payouts. And, I have a friend back in my riding of Couch in Malahat Langford who's looked at the financials of oil and gas. He's noted that the oil and gas sector has shifted to a capital discipline, flat growth, and high shareholder return strategy. They, too, are using their massive profits not to reinvest in industry, not to pay to the Canadian people, but really to send to shareholders, and those are the primary beneficiaries. Do you see correlations also in the grocery retail sector?
Oh, you're quite right, sir. In fact, your initial question talked about the necessities of life, and this being one reason why Canadians are so upset about food prices. But there are other necessities of life as well, including housing and energy and other things that we must buy. And in many of those cases, companies were able to take advantage of the disruptions of the pandemic to increase their own profits. And you could say this is just how the market works. Suppliers will charge what the market will bear. In my own view, I think there's both ethical and economic reasons to challenge the ability of companies with that market power to increase prices at a moment of economic and social disruption. Energy prices initially in the period up until mid-2022 were the leading cause of inflation in Canada, and the profits captured by those companies made the supermarket profits look like spare change, really. It was enormous. Now energy profits have come back down, in part because of the normalization of supply relationships, and food retail profits have stayed quite high. But in both cases, they earned huge amounts of profit, contributed significantly to Canadian inflation, and then the macroeconomic after effects of inflation, including the high interest rates that we're experiencing now. And they have so much money, they literally don't know what to do with it. So that's why in both the energy sector and the food retail sector and some other sectors, you've seen a surge in share buybacks by companies who are just saying, oh, well, we're going to find a way to pay this back to investors. The federal government, of course, has a new modest tax on share buybacks. I think that's a good idea. I think it should be expanded, and other measures should be taken to capture some of the froth that is represented in those record profits in both food, retail, and energy and other sectors.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stanford. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. You mentioned the word frothy, Mr. Stanford. I'm going to be wanting a beer after this committee. So, but anyways, speaking of committee, we only have a few minutes left, colleagues, so I'm going to try to keep it tight. I'm going to ask 4 minutes from Liberals and Conservatives, and we'll do 2.5 for the Bloc and NDP. Over to you, Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll pass over to my colleague, Mr. LaHoo, right after this. I'd like to put the following motion on notice. Given Canada's territories have disproportionately higher food prices due to transportation costs, and that the carbon tax makes everything more expensive, and that the Premier of the Northwest Territories has requested a complete exemption from the carbon tax for his jurisdiction, the committee call on the government to immediately carve out the Northwest Territories from the carbon tax to bring home lower food prices. Over to Mr. LaHoo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Bourgoin, you mentioned a lot in your opening remarks with regards to the equitable relationship between various stakeholders. You also talked about having equal standards. The size of vegetable growers in Quebec is more family-sized. And you talked about, for example, importing products from foreign countries. We, of course, are doing the work correctly to make sure that we can import certain products. In the future, we might have to import products even more. What do you think the impact will be on that? Well, from a regulatory perspective, yes, the regulation is there, and of course the international commercial aspect is regulated. But with regards to resources, there is a lot that is afforded by Canada to do inspections. I think that there should be a lot more inspections at the border in order to ensure that the products that are entering Canada respect the local regulation. We have to make sure that there is equity, but also the biosecurity of food for consumers rather. So it's not the regulation that is wrong, it's the application that isn't being done correctly, and that's not the first time we've heard that here. Let's talk about putting new regulation on plastic. From your perspective, how do you think that this will financially impact companies? Of course, it will have an impact because we will have to change how we go through our logistics. The biggest challenge is the shelf life of our products. There are a lot of vegetable and fruit products that are very fragile. In Quebec and Canada, we have Quebec holds 80% of the vegetable production of the rest of for the rest of Canada. Sometimes vegetables from this area are sent all the way to Vancouver, and so we have to make sure that we can make sure that the products remain fresh once the customer has access to them. If freshness and biosecurity are an issue, then we will just be moving the problem to another sector and we will be encouraging food waste. That's the last thing we want to encourage. Thank you, Mr. Bourgoin. Same question for Mr. Le Maire. Can you talk about how this will impact your sector? I know you talked about it earlier, but maybe you have something to add.
Ron, you're on mute there, fella. We're at time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Keep it
very
tight.
Very quickly, dramatic impact, 20% plus cost to food, increased waste. Everything Mr. Bourgoin mentioned was accurate.
Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Lewis. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank everyone for being here as well. It's an important discussion. I would direct my questions to Mr. Stanford, or Dr. Stanford, I should say. You stated that the latest industry-wide financial data on food retail is showing that the retail profits have doubled since pre-pandemic norms, and that profits are continuing to grow. You also mentioned that grocery retailers are not capital intensive. They're not growing, processing, or manufacturing the products that they sell. They're producing, you said they purchase products from suppliers, adding their markup and selling to consumers. So what are the main reasons behind this increase? And in your opinions, why haven't profit margins narrowed back to pre-pandemic levels? Is industry concentration or demand inelasticity contributing to the sustained high profits in the food sector?
That's a very good question, sir. Thank you for asking it. And I can't profess to have the final answer on it. I think it requires further study. And I know that both your committee and the Competition Bureau itself have been trying to do that. And your tasks would be easier if you had more access to transparent data from the retailers themselves. No, I don't mean to underestimate the complexity of running an efficient, modern food retail operation. There's certainly a lot of planning and technology and logistics and entrepreneurship involved. But in terms of the amount of invested capital in the firms, it's small relative to the total flow of revenue. And that's how these companies can make a very, very high rate of return on equity and generate very healthy returns for their investors, including total return, including capital gain. The share prices of most of these firms have risen dramatically since pandemic. And then the distribution of actual cash, whether through normal dividends or share repurchases. So why have they been able to sustain those record profits while profitability elsewhere in Canada's economy has been returning towards normal over the past year is a very important question. I'm sure that the concentrated nature of the industry has something to do with it. I'm sure the desperation of consumers to put food on the table, as noted earlier, it is a necessity of life, creates an inelasticity to demand. I think it's requiring further study to really identify any more of the specific reasons why this industry, quite uniquely, has been able to sustain the record profits that rose after the pandemic, despite higher food prices and a decline in the quantity of food that Canadians are purchasing.
Thank you for that answer. An economic report released said that the price of pollution adds 30 cents to a $100 grocery bill. So what does that and also your data suggest about the impact of carbon pricing on food prices? Because we've heard that other factors are having a greater effect on grocery prices, like climate change, supply chain issues, global energy prices. Can you comment and expand on that and what we can do here in Canada to mitigate those factors?
Well, energy prices themselves would be a completely higher order of magnitude on the impact of food prices than the carbon price itself. In fact, the increase in energy prices charged by energy producers, including those in Canada on Canadian energy, charged to Canadian consumers, nothing directly to do with what's happening in the Middle East, means that the impact on food prices was 30 or 40 times greater than the direct impact of the carbon price. The other point to remember is that even that 30 cents on $100 estimate is really only telling one side of the story. That is based on tracking the carbon price through the input chain into all of the different factors that end up in the consumer's final basket. But the whole point of the carbon price is to encourage changes in behavior, to shift towards renewable forms of energy and to conserve energy, both of which will have offsetting impacts on final prices. So some of the studies internationally that have looked at the overall economic effects of carbon pricing on the whole price level, not just on products that use fossil fuels intensively, suggests there's no net impact on the overall consumer price index or potentially a slight deflationary impact because of the benefits of strong investments in renewable energy on energy costs and energy supply. So if anything, I think that number you throw out is probably too pessimistic. And on a net basis, the impact on food prices will be nothing, if not, in fact, negative.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stanford. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Yves, 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Léger-Bourgouin, we'll pick up where we left off. I'm happy that you talked about the reciprocity of standards and how urgent it is to provide more resources. Now, the Code of Conduct, you talked about it in your opening remarks. You've been at the working group and around the negotiation table. How did it go? I was there with Ron Lemaire. Of course, there were some confidentiality terms, but there were some very constructive discussions. The colleagues from Sobeys and Metro genuinely wanted to understand what suppliers are going through. I will insist that they really wanted a compromise. They wanted to implement the first code of conduct. It is not a means to an end. It is really a way to ensure that the relationships between suppliers and retailers improves, and they know that this will improve the situation for citizens and customers. Do you agree with witnesses who say that the Code of Conduct won't have an impact on the prices and that it will simply regulate the relationships? I think that if there are less fines, that there will be lower prices. What do you think? I agree, Mr. Perron. I think your logic is correct. If the retailers don't want to review their business model and reduce fines and fees, then there wouldn't be any palpable change for the consumers. But better transparency means that there's a little bit of embarrassment, perhaps, for some companies. These companies have shares, and they, of course, care about their image. What happened in the UK is likely to happen in Canada as well in coming years. How should we convince the two retailers to sign on? What's your solution? Make the code mandatory and implement coercive measures. We have been negotiating for 2 years. New Zealand also negotiated for 2 years, and it ended with legislation. So why should we take 3, 4, 5 years to complete this? We should complete this by 2024. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to direct my last question to Mr. Lemaire. Mr. Lemaire, I was happy to join with a number of my colleagues around this table at the CPMA when you were in Ottawa, and we did that MP roundtable. And I do appreciate how sensitive the issue on the plastics is for the industry. I think we heard that very clearly. And I remember saying during that panel that, you know, the riding I represent, being a coastal environment, we're very sensitive to the issue of plastic pollution because of microplastics and bioaccumulation and so on. So it's, I think, a noble intent, but I think you've very well outlined the concerns that the industry has. That being said, you know, I remember exactly going to Montreal last year. I think it was in April. You were at the Montreal Convention Centre, and, you know, all kinds of companies that you represent were there displaying not only the latest technology, but also some innovations that were going on in packaging. And I think, like, the big concern is that, you know, a lot of Canadians that I speak to are just wondering, like, you know, how do we keep plastics from going into the waste stream? How do we, you know, encourage a little bit more recycling, reuse? I'm just wondering, like, you know, I think this is probably a good moment for you to outline some of the important steps that your members are already taking in this regard, because I did see some pretty great demonstrations. They may not be product ready yet, but it does show that there are companies making a lot of effort in this. And if you want to just take the next minute to talk a little bit about that.
So thank you, Mr. McGregor. And I think you hit it right on the head. The industry has been progressive. We've been working actually since 2018 before to drive change in sustainable packaging. But there's a lot more complexity to where we're going compared to what the policy framework is suggesting under P2. So right now we've looked at increased recycled content in our plastic materials, which is why we need to look at a systems approach in our recycling framework across the country to more effectively collect and recycle. We've looked at a 17% reduction in the ratio of food weight to packaging. We've looked at leveraging the golden design rules effectively to drive those across the country to have effective, sustainable solutions. We worked with Agriculture Canada to launch an online platform to provide the food industry with direction how to create sustainable packaging. We've looked at lightweighting, where you've removed 30% of the material in the package so that it can be more effective and more sustainable in the marketplace. These are just some of the pieces towards creating a circular economy, and the industry is being very progressive to get there. The challenge is to move to a total elimination is a step too far for anyone, not only in Canada, but on a global level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lemaire. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of the second panel. I want to say a few things. First of all, of course, on your behalf to our witnesses, thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening and to contribute to the study. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2024. And on that note, colleagues, we did have a scheduled time on Thursday morning. However, there's uncertainty about when the House may rise. And so to be fair to our witnesses, in case we were to rise on Wednesday, I'm going to give you your time back on Thursday morning, and we will continue in the new year. So with that, if I don't happen to see you in the House, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays, and hope you have a great time back with your families and your constituents following this week. Okay, meeting adjourned, and thank you to all our staff as well. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you.
Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. and we'll see you tomorrow. I'll probably be streaming more.